My first guest here on West Coast Live is the author of a novel called Cash Out, and it's a funny expose of life in the darker side of the Silicon Valley entrepreneurial world. And it involves a company run by a billionaire, of which there are a million in Silicon Valley, because this is 2008, where it's set. Although it may have been inspired also by 1999. And my guest, Greg Bardsley, worked as a reporter for a newspaper called Metro. He later went to work for speechwriters, as a speechwriter for LSI Logic and Sun Microsystems. So he has some insider knowledge. And in fact, the hero of this book is a speechwriter. Gosh. Please welcome Greg Bardsley, author of Cash Out, to West Coast Live. How do you do? See you. You know, there's a wonderful movie out called Millions, made by Danny Boyle, which was actually based on sorry, I'm going to digress just a minute before I get to you here, which was based on a novel written by a man who just won the Best Children's Novel Award from The Guardian in the UK. Didn't know it had come from a book. But the premise is that these two boys get this amount of money off of it, just flies in a big athletic bag out of a train, lands by them, and they have an existential issue of what to do about this money. And each boy has their own fantasy about what to do with it, and they take actions on it. And the interesting twist on this is that they have 2 weeks before these pounds become valueless, because Britain has gone to the euro, and all pounds have to be turned into euros. So they have 2 weeks to act on these millions of money. In this book, the pressure that's on is that our hero has 3 days before his options vest, which means he can sell stock for a couple of $100 that he'll buy at $8 a piece, and he'll become a millionaire, he'll cash out, he'll escape, he'll live the life on the beach. This is everyone's fantasy, right? And then things go awry. That's where we begin with Cash Out. Greg Bardsley, welcome to West Coast Live.
Thanks, Edge. My pleasure.
Yeah. So, is a fantasy to cash out for you, too?
It's interesting. A lot of people ask that question.
Darn. Let me try another one then. Did this book originally begin in 1999 then, and you got it out in 2008?
I got to really think about how I answer these questions. I think the thing that I wanted to make the book fun, but I also wanted to draw from things I'm really passionate about. I think a lot of the people in the Valley or throughout the Bay Area are wrestling with these issues, and I was exposed. I literally did, back in the day, I did a panel at San Jose State with some other communicators. I'm a speechwriter and exec comms person. And one of the other panelists was employee number 60 from Google. And he had done WD-40 PR before he exhausted his interest in WD-40 and decided to do an information interview with these guys in the garage called Google. And so I started to think about that, God, what would I do? And if I, had, that type of those type of options, as you say. And so it's interesting because the Bay Area is such an amazing place with so much energy and so many different people, and it's hard to be away from it. But I think being a Bay Area native, growing up here, seeing how much the place has changed. I remember this area here where there were double-decker freeways, or a freeway right in front of the Perry Building. So many great things have happened, but the culture has changed too.
So how do you see this affecting, say, the values of family life? Of how do you raise children in this environment where the focus becomes not only the acquisition of money, but also the expenditure of vast amounts of time on doing that?
Yeah, I mean, that is another theme in the book. It is really challenging. I mean, I think as a parent, I have 2 young kids, and my wife and I were always, you don't really know. I think the decisions you make as a parent, you'll find out maybe 20 years later during a therapy session that your son or daughter invites you to. So, I mean, it's really challenging. And especially I live in the Mid-Peninsula. There's just a ton of really amazing people. I think the Valley has drawn an amazing group of people and has changed the culture. One group, or I wouldn't divide it into different groups, but there are certainly lots of people. Like, I'm a molecular biologist, and this is where I come to do my work and change the world. There's a lot of, and it's also been a magnet, especially in '99 and 2008 or prior to that, where I want to make a lot of money and I want to come here. And everybody's used to being number one. And sometimes I'm worried about kids being able to just be kids. And what is the right choice, right?
There are, early on in the book, there are some bad guys who show up who they're anonymous, initially IT guys who've been laid off. Their jobs have been outsourced to Bangalore, so they're upset. But it turns out, they're kind of like evil magicians. They have access to everything. And they travel in a van. They've named the Enterprise, and they talk to one another in Star Trek terms.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, if you really think about the one thing that it's been really fun to hear with the feedback or how people react to the book, but it is kind of scary if you think about. I have never encountered any IT people like that, but if you really think about all the things that people do online and how much of your life you put online, if you had the wrong folks who are out for revenge, or they wanted you to collude with them, what could happen? Yeah. And that's exactly what happens. He basically has 3 days left, and he doesn't want to stick around for even more money. He could, but he just wants to find more balance in his life. He wants more time with his family, more time with his kids. He wants to re-examine, what he's doing with his professional life, and maybe kind of get back to his roots, and also just get, be exposed and spend more time with people who've been in the state for a little longer, and where people smile back at you a little more often, and then everything happens. He is basically the geeks, the IT geeks come, and they have different ideas for him for the last 3 days. Yeah.
And in there's a lot of comedy, a lot of fright, a lot of suffering, because the book opens with our hero going through a vasectomy, and so. Shortly after he leaves the doctor's office and is kind of padded up and told to ice himself every 20 minutes, he gets kneed.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, right. You're reading the book.
Yeah, there is a lot of repeated trauma to sensitive areas. And so one of the Harper Perennial, just the creative geniuses that designed this book and edited the book. So if you read the book, you'll see on the cover there are some inside jokes, but there are a lot of frozen peas involved in the book that... Yes, and so
being the ice pack of choice.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, when you set out to write a book about this area, there are a number of choices that you could have done, and your way was the comic novel. So you must also have seen day-to-day comedy in what you observed.
Yeah, it's I originally wrote the book for 1999, and I just thought that was, but prior to that I had been a newspaper reporter, and I just was like a different culture, and I was just blown away by how much what a different culture it was, especially back then when it was just irrational exuberance, and there was a ton of money, and maybe in some cases we kind of lost our way a little bit, but yeah, there was it was fascinating just in terms of there was a lot of excitement, a lot of ego. I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, and then I also have my own characters. We were talking earlier, said you like a certain character named Calhoun, who's one of my favorites. But then I just, when I was writing, I decided, this also needs to be a little lighter. And so some of my favorite characters, like this man named Larry, who hangs out in front of his house in a skin-colored Speedo and slathers cocoa butter all over his body and drinks alone at night while he listens to Alvin and the Chipmunks in the dark, Folks like that, so we're in the book. And
What was the phrase? I was a lawyer until they asked me to stop. And he had another job where he was also asked to stop.
Yeah, a lot of people, brilliant, but asked to stop often, yeah. And he lives across the street from the protagonist and drinks alone on this dark porch where you really can't see Larry except for the ember of his, tobacco pipe. And it's a little creepy, and they would like him to stop. Yeah.
And there is a very kind of curious world about Silicon Valley. I was talking to somebody once about the idea that you could have different currencies in the United States. There'd be the LA Hollywood dollar, where a film director or producer could say, Yeah, hold that book for me. Option, sure. Send him a check for 50,000. I'll, give me a couple extra weeks to look at it. Or you could be somebody in another part of the country trying to sell a house for $75,000, or you could be here where there's a car, that costs $60,000. If you try to move around from sort of country to country within the U.S., you're actually dealing with very curious foreign exchange fluctuations.
That is very true. And it's one of the things that's been interesting is to hear from people who've read the book in different parts of the country. And, I think that this, not to give anything away with the book, but, I think the protagonist in a way could be considered an ingrate, considered all the good things that have happened to him and some of the feedback I get. You call him the hero, but some people call him the anti-hero. He definitely is. He's a human character who's made a lot of mistakes and also loves his family, very much, and is trying to stay tethered to some values that are important to him.
Well, he also has to go through a lot of internal search and struggle about things that he's done or will be caught out, or has to figure out what's worth it to him, most, and his family, his job, his security. And then he says, well, but nobody else has a mortgage like this in the Bay Area,
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. It's exactly. You don't have to go too far from this area to see dramatic fluctuations in, for instance, property. What's happening just on the other side of the Diablo Range in terms of houses and people who are really struggling to keep their homes. And then there's other folks who are bringing in, coaches from the UK.